Hi, I'm Wanda King, Chairman for Target 2, Women's Healthcare and Wellness. Also a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, Beta Pi Omega Chapter. I would like to welcome you to this segment where we will continue our coping with COVID-19. We have with us one of our very own sorority sisters, Dr. Abeer Washington.
Dr. Abeer Washington is a native of Brooklyn, New York. She earned a master's degree in biopharmaceutical sciences and a doctorate in medicine, both from the University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences. After completing her residency in psychiatry, she began working as a psychiatrist in Pine Bluff as the medical director of Southeast Arkansas Behavioral Healthcare Systems and a medical director of psychiatry at Jefferson Regional Medical Center, positions that she currently maintains. She is also the CEO and owner of the Rice Clinic, a Christian mental health clinic servicing Little Rock since 1988, providing mental health therapy and medication management by Christian providers. Dr. Washington has numerous awards in her background, including the Robert E. Elliott Foundation Fellowship for her work in suicide prevention. She was also named one of Arkansas Business's 40 Under 40. She placed as a recipient of the Jewel M. Thomas Visionary Award in recognition of her visionary leadership, and she was also the recipient of the John H. Johnson Achievement Award. Dr. Washington enjoys volunteering, especially in the areas of mental health. She is a strong supporter of overall mental and physical wellness, which she describes as her calling. Her mission is to destigmatize mental illnesses in all communities, particularly in communities of color. She and her loving husband, Courtney, reside here in Little Rock, Arkansas. Dr. Washington, we are so excited to have you, and we are looking forward to this discussion today on how we're all coping during COVID.
Well, I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
That's awesome. We were so excited about today. And a lot of the questions that people have, we hope that during this segment we can answer some of those. One of the questions that I hear over and over again is, why does it seem mental health issues are more prevalent during this crisis? Why? Just why?
Well, I feel that this particular crisis has impacted all of us, not just people with an underlying mental illness or maybe a mental illness that lies right under the surface. It's impacted everyone. And when I look at what it takes, what the criteria for a trauma, this particular crisis has met every criteria. It's been unexpected. We didn't expect it to have the impact that it did. We didn't expect it to come when it did. It affects our children. It affects the elderly. We don't know exactly how long it's going to last. There's that element of the unknown. And then also, we don't know exactly how to treat it. Or actually, there is no treatment except, some people go into the hospital, some people don't. And so we find ourselves battling this illness, this virus that doesn't have a face, doesn't have a smell. There are a lot of unknowns that come with it. So in dealing with this particular trauma, you will find a lot of mental illnesses surfacing. A lot of people are anxious. Maybe people who aren't generally anxious find themselves more anxious, worried about, I can't touch this. Are my children going to get sick? How am I going to manage my finances? How am I going to deal if I need to go to the hospital, if I need some type of medical care? So with these unknowns, we find increase in depression and an increase in anxiety. And so that's what we're finding with this particular illness. And so I'd like to hopefully talk about ways that we can combat that during this session.
Dr. Washington, that is so interesting that you characterize this as a trauma, because I never looked at it in that particular way. What are some things when a patient is presented that has an initial trauma that, I mean, what can we do to help?
Yeah. So first is to kind of identify, and I'm glad you mentioned that, looking at this as a trauma. And so that kind of normalizes the response that a lot of people have. So there are a lot of people who might have some of these symptoms. You might find yourself more irritable. You know, you're socially isolating if you're an extrovert, or you're around your kids when you're not used to. Suddenly you're a homeschool teacher and you didn't sign up for that. You know, you have to be super aware when you're going in public places, and especially aware when people are violating your personal space. So you might find yourself more irritable, and with that is anger and mood swings. A lot of people have had difficulty sleeping. Sometimes that's the first sign you see, and even nightmares, and that comes with a trauma. Also, you might see poor self-care. Some people might be neglecting their self-care. There's been an increase in alcohol intake, as much as 50% of an increase in consumption or purchasing of alcohol. So a lot of people will turn to, you know, mind-altering substances, alcohol, and even drugs to cope. And then sometimes you might find a disconnect with people. I don't know if you've seen anyone, I see it in my patients. They are using the social isolation to sort of go into their own bubble and disconnect from other people, which can be a really dangerous place. I do want to mention when it is time to get help.
Yes.
Yes.
So
need to hear that.
Yes.
Absolutely, absolutely. If you're experiencing these symptoms and they're ongoing, if you feel a sense of hopelessness, and if you are contemplating suicide or even entertaining the idea of leaving Earth, leaving this place, you need to get professional help. You need to know when it's time to reach out to someone who does this for a living.
Okay.
You see a lot of cases of suicide during this COVID-19. Have we seen a lot of cases of that?
Yeah, unfortunately, there was a news article that came out today of an ER physician who was there on the front lines, and she committed suicide. She actually contracted the disease, and she beat it, but just the stress of dealing with patients or treating patients and the sense of helplessness. And actually, I'm saying this, but I haven't interviewed her, and I don't know her, but I know other people on the front lines, and there's a sense of helplessness that they have. And so, unfortunately, she committed suicide. There was a dentist who committed suicide, and, you know, they've been shut down. So there are studies, this is kind of interesting. There are studies that tell us that in solitary confinement, around day 45 is the time that things start getting more intense. And this is kind of around that time. And
so are there resources for people that are contemplating suicide?
Yes. Well, you know, I work at the Rice Clinic here in Little Rock. You're always welcome to call the Rice Clinic at 501-225-0576, and I'm sure we'll talk about that at the end. And I'm actually, I'm very proud of this. At the Rice Clinic, we've created a resource for frontline workers, a hotline that's available to frontline workers 24/7. So they can call at any time, slip away, and give us a call, because we don't want anyone to suffer. We don't want our frontliners suffering during this process. And that number is 501-904-7805.
Is there a certain time of day they can call, certain days of the week, or is there?
No, anytime. We've got it open 24/7, and we've got our staff volunteering to do the service.
That's
That's
wonderful.
amazing. Yeah,
That's
Yeah.
wonderful.
Yeah.
That kind of leads us into our next my next question is, what advice, you mentioned several frontline workers who have committed suicide or are attempting, what advice would you give frontline workers to help them cope during this time?
I think the best way I can approach this is to give my own personal account. In addition to working at my clinic, at the Rice Clinic in Little Rock, which I do outpatient services, I also run an inpatient service. And I remember when this first happened, both in my outpatient clinic and my inpatient clinic, I was doing everything I knew to make sure that COVID was not going to enter any place that I cover. And so I was going to protect my people. I was doing everything I could. I watched the news. I read every study that I could. And I was meticulous in making sure we followed all of these guidelines to the point became a little obsessive. Anyway, I did all of that. And despite my best efforts in my inpatient clinic, I admitted a patient who was COVID positive. And the impact that it had on me was pretty intense. I blamed myself for things that were not my fault. Mm-hmm. I guessed and second guessed and retraced my tracks and felt guilty about things that I didn't know. There were no signs and symptoms in this particular patient. And I, had periods of sleeplessness and a lot of self-doubt and worrying. And ultimately it ended up being, and the worst of the worst, what I thought was the worst is, somebody else developed a positive test or contracted the virus. And so in my mind, my worst fear became true. Mm-hmm. And so I felt incredibly helpless. But it was an opportunity for God to show his face, because in my helplessness, I saw God's presence. And I see the reality of COVID-19 is that it's not this big monster that we created. As a matter of fact, the monster that I created was greater in my head than it was in reality. I had 2 patients who were compromised in some way, both by age and disease, and they were perfectly fine. After a short flu-like period, they were fine. My staff, nobody was impacted. Mm-hmm. And so for me, this was a very powerful message. It was just the realization that the vast majority of people who develop this, who contract the disease, have mild illness, and that's something we don't think about very often. Mm-hmm. And of course, I don't want to minimize what's going on in New York. I don't want to minimize that. But just the realization that I had created something greater in my head mm-hmm. than it was in reality was huge. And so I try to tell my patients that and just remind them of the reality. And also the people on the front lines, what you're dealing with may not be as great as you see. The vast majority of cases in healthy patients are mild, and they're short-lived. There are other people who have a longer period of illness, and of course there are fatalities. But just realizing, keeping it all in perspective, I think that was very important for me.
And I think that's what a lot of people are dealing with. Everyone can't work from home.
Right.
Dr. Abeer. So some people are having to go out of the home each day, and they're going out into the public daily to work so they can provide for their families. What advice will you give to those people, or can you give to those people, and how to deal with the stress of being around a lot of people all day that may or may not have COVID-19? Some people are fearful, and they don't know what to do, and they look nervous. When you're out in public, some people actually look nervous when you see them.
I agree.
You see them like trying to avoid you, and
exactly.
so can you help us with that, because some people are really struggling?
Yes, and that can be a really exhausting place to be. I think there's a lot of power in wearing your mask and washing your hands and maintaining social distance. And even when you have to go to work, if you can't maintain a 6-foot distance between you and other people, wear your mask and be really vigilant in washing your hands and using sanitizer. I think beyond that, we have to recognize that there's an element of control that we have, and take control in those areas. And then, there are other things that we simply cannot control. We can't try to control this, micromanage this disease as much as we can control, someone hitting us with a car. I want people to recognize the power that they have and the things that they can control, and the other things that you simply can't control, the outcome, handing it over to God, finding that spiritual relationship, finding the peace of surrendering to God and allowing Him to cover you. And so I think that's the best advice I can give anyone. We can't hide in our homes forever. There's some people who can't pay rent. They don't qualify for unemployment. They can't feed their children. And so they're going to have to go out to work. As long as we maintain our social distance and wash our hands and wear our masks, those things that we hear over again, there is a lot of power in that. There's a lot of protection in that.
That's great. And those are everyday things that we keep hearing on the news. We read the newspaper, but I think some people need to hear that, what they can do to protect themselves and their family. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I'd like to go back to earlier in our conversation when you mentioned it a little bit, but we talked about triggers. Things that we need to be looking out, not just for, in general in the community, but with ourselves, with our families. What are some warning signs that somebody may not be doing very well? Can you go over those again?
Sure. If someone is isolating, will not return your phone calls, if someone is neglecting personal self-care, if someone is not sleeping, if you find that they are maybe drinking more than they should, or drinking alone, that's a big trigger, drinking when you're alone. And then if you find swings in their mood that are concerning, I think that might be a sign that something is going on. If they mention anything about wanting to hurt themselves, or they start maybe writing a will or giving up their personal belongings, giving away personal belongings, those are signs that they need to get some help.
Okay.
And I think we need to check on each other.
Yeah.
Yeah,
we're challenged through our church. Tuesday is Talking Tuesday. You call and you check on people, in particular the elderly, people who may live alone, so I agree with you. I think my family personally, we had our first family Zoom call last night, and it was a lot of fun having my mom and her sisters, people from all over the country, just reconnecting.
Right. Reconnecting. I think that's really important. And, connecting to the things that matter and disconnecting from COVID. There's going to be life after COVID, but all we hear is COVID on the news. Maybe stepping away, and you talked about this. Before, stepping away from the news.
Yes, I have. I've stepped away. I get my news from my daddy.
Yeah.
So every day when I talk to him, he updates me on what's going on. But I initially was glued to, what was happening, how it was happening, how many people had died, how many people had been diagnosed. And it was becoming too much for me personally. So I don't watch the news anymore. So,
Yeah. So that's a good thing. I mean, just really unplugging and recognizing that there is life after COVID. I'm going to control what I can control. The rest, I'm going to hand it over, and the freedom that comes with handing it over.
another piece of advice I just read, and I thought it was great. It was like, find some humor,
Yeah.
watch comedy shows. Oh, so I've been going back watching some, probably not the most appropriate, but I am laughing, just crying.
Exactly.
And it's so funny, just to disconnect from
That.
from COVID. Yeah.
Exactly. And also having true gratitude, for what you have, true gratitude. And what I like to do is to just be thankful and just thank God. Thank you for this, thank you for that. And just allow that gratitude to grow, and just, it kind of minimizes the anxiety that exists.
I think that's awesome, and we all can be reminded of that. And also another thing that you hear a lot about is you see fitness, physical fitness and exercise. And I just wonder, what role does physical fitness and exercise play in the overall behavioral health or mental health?
Exactly. Yeah. So that's a really good question, because we often talk about physical exercise for the physical benefits, and then there's also the mental benefits, and that's my vice. I like to work out and get all my aggression out, and get everything. I get a lot from the physical activity. I get a lot mentally as well as physically. But I think there's something to be said about maintaining healthy physical movement. And I'm not talking about, you don't have to necessarily go out and join a CrossFit type gym. I'm talking about healthy movement, regular movement to maintain physical health, because we are finding that the people who suffer the most from COVID, the morbidity and mortality is seen in the people with the medical comorbidities. In other words, the high blood pressure, the cardiovascular disease, like really up there, diabetes. And so these are disorders or diseases that affect us, especially people of color, in the long term. But now we're finding something that's out of control, that's out of our control. And when you introduce it to a person who already has diabetes, who already has cardiovascular disease, then they're more likely to die. So that, it just makes you think, this is our opportunity to, one way to take control of it is to take control of our own personal health. And right now is the best time to do it. We've got a little additional time, some of us. So this would be a good time to make sure you get the physical activities, that you're getting out and getting 30 minutes a day on average, not necessarily every day, but on most days, getting some physical activity, eating healthily. So I just think it's really important to look at it that way, to take this as maybe a call to action, to actually take control of our own personal physical health.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And so you don't have to be a marathon runner.
Exactly.
What you're saying, just to go out for 30 minutes a day, any of us can do that, and then they get some vitamin D. Also,
Exactly.
today was a very nice day earlier. So I think that any sun they can get, and just get out and get moving.
Exactly.
Awesome. Exactly. That's great.
So I have another question for you. If you are feeling overwhelmed, if it seems like the pressure is just too much right now, how does someone get in touch with someone that is a psychiatrist or a psychologist? What do we need to do to make that connection?
So generally, people will reach out to their primary care doctor, who will refer you to a psychologist or a psychiatrist. The psychiatrist generally prescribes medication, and a psychologist or a therapist will do individual therapy with the person who needs the therapy. So usually starting with your primary care doctor or just calling a clinic, you know, a lot of times you hear about it word of mouth. You can call our clinic and speak to a therapist or a psychiatrist and set up an appointment and develop a
So you
relationship.
have both at your facility. So,
Yes.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
That's awesome.
That's great. Well, are there any other tips that you would like to share with our audience? Any information that you would like to pass on?
Sure. The one concept I wanted to talk about is mindfulness and just kind of being aware of your surroundings. It's just a really well-studied concept. Being aware of your emotions, almost like you're stepping outside of your body and just noticing it. Just recognize when you're anxious and don't judge yourself for it. Like recognizing right now I feel anxious, right now I feel angry. And with the concept of mindfulness, let's say you want to take a walk. Decide how you want to feel during that walk. Make everything about that moment. Don't have your mind all over the place, worrying about the past or the future or in your cell phone. Staying in the moment and experiencing it. How does it feel? How does it smell? How does it make you feel? And then also deciding how you want to feel after the experience. So when you incorporate self-awareness and mindfulness, you can come to a more calm place and just overall be a healthier person. And so that's something that a therapist and a psychiatrist can help you through.
That's awesome.
Awesome.
Well, this has been a great time this evening. I've enjoyed all of the information that you've given to us. It's been a great segment. I think a lot of people have some answers to some of the questions they've had. How would someone get in contact with you, Dr. Washington, after today's segment?
Well, you can call us at the Rice Clinic at 501-225-0576. And we have psychiatrists and therapists ready to serve you and to help you through this crisis or any other issue that you're dealing with. So give us a call.
Awesome.
Thank you so very much. And we look forward to hearing from you in the future.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Happy that you were here. So on behalf of Target 2, Women's Healthcare and Wellness, Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, Beta Pi Omega Chapter, thank you, Dr. Washington. Have a good day.
Take care. Bye-bye.